students, I don't know about you, but I have been pretty bored of sitting in the house. I feel like I need to stretch those legs. Let's go take a walk. So these are my trusty Birkenstock sandals. Are they the most stylish? No. Are they super comfortable? Yes. Have they lasted for years? Yes. Let's go. Hey, it's sidewalks. Yes, there's a person. Stay away, stay away. Just look at all of this beautiful green chlorophyll. All this photosynthesis happening right now. Sugar is being made. Walking by my neighbor's yard, I noticed this little guy here. There's another one over there. You can barely see him. Who's red? This is a wild strawberry, actually. Let's take a look. Don't tell my neighbor that I picked his strawberries. I really love this bright, vibrant green of springtime. These are some jasmine plants that are growing on my other neighbor's yard. Person with cute corgi dog. Stay away. Love how green it is outside. Don't know about y'all though, I get super self-conscious when I'm filming myself outside, even if these people are 6 feet away from me. I'm gonna put this phone away until I get back home. Strawberry. The trusty old Birkenstocks have taken us back home. So, you may have been looking at this little strawberry and wondering to yourself, that does not look at all like the strawberries that I know. That's true. That's because this is a particular species of wild strawberry called Hydrous Virginica. I don't know. I don't speak Latin. I don't think you're even supposed to say Latin out loud. But you can probably already see that it is different from our regular garden strawberries that we normally eat, which are generally much bigger, have less of a round shape and more of like a pointed cone type shape. It's a different species of strawberry. The story behind the strawberries can actually be displayed with this type of graph. Remind me again, what type of selection are we seeing here? If you said disruptive, you're correct. We see here two extremes of the phenotype being shown. One really small one, that wild strawberry I just picked up, versus one larger one, which unfortunately I don't have my hands on at the moment. Now, if you look at these strawberries and the fact that they're so different from each other, and you also realize that they're different species, you can see that things like selection actually play a role in something we're going to call speciation. Which is, how do I actually select for two extreme phenotypes to a point when I create two different species? In order to do that, we need to define what is a species. Let's prepare our notebooks for some notes for today. You're going to go to the next blank page, which is page 109. Title it for our topic of the day, which is the idea of speciation, or how you create two different species. Now, our definition for species is probably going to be something you're not so familiar with. A species is going to be a group of animals or organisms that can reproduce with each other. And there is one more catch to the definition of a species. Not only do these organisms breed with each other, they also have to produce offspring which are fertile, meaning their offspring should be able to have more offspring, which then should be able to have more offspring. That's it for the definition of a species. So to actually define a species and to figure out how do I speciate or create two species out of one, I have to figure out how to keep animals from breeding with each other. That's what this lesson is all going to be about. The best way to test if some very similar seeming organisms are actually two distinct species is actually to breed them together. Because remember, the second definition for the species is that they had to be able to produce fertile offspring. Offspring that can have offspring who can then have offspring. The special name for the offspring of two different species or two fairly genetically different organisms is a hybrid. So, just capturing a definition for ourselves, a hybrid being the offspring of two genetically different organisms. I'm going to say usually they're two different species, but remember, one way to test if two organisms are different species is to see if their offspring or their hybrids actually can have babies or survive. Guys, it's hybrid. But in all seriousness, let's get back to the concept of hybrids and a hybrid test to see if two organisms belong to the same or different species. Think about it. The way that you cause them to evolve separately or go through that disruptive selection is to keep them from breeding together so they stop sharing the same genes. Then they'll just kind of isolate and create their own gene pool that's going to be genetically different from each other, to a point where they can't really get back together and make babies. Their genes have evolved to be so different. How do we keep organisms from making babies? To answer that question, let's take a look at our friends, the gummy bears. So, how do we keep two gummy bears from getting together, sharing their genes, and keeping themselves part of the same species? If you think about it, abstinence is the best way. We've got to figure out some way to physically separate gummy bears from reproducing. In nature, that would probably just be some sort of physical barrier in their environment that keeps them from getting to see each other and make those beautiful gummy bear babies. For example, if I have a mountain pass, a rocky and dangerous lava field, a river, any sort of physical barrier keeping my gummy bears apart from each other, there's no way they can get together and make babies. This will lead the two gummy bear populations to quickly speciate or start to develop different adaptations that actually help them in their own physical environment, which is slightly different. If groups are kept physically different or physically separated from each other for long enough, even if you were to remove that physical barrier, you would realize that they have evolved from each other so differently, they no longer can get together and have babies. And they now are members of a different species. Leads us to our next keywords of the day, which is the idea of allopatric versus sympatric speciation. Patric probably reminds you a little bit of the word patriotic. Patriotic, patrimony, those all relate to our fatherland. And in the case of biology, patric is going to refer to the land of origin where your species are. So then you realize that the key difference between allopatric and sympatric is actually that first prefix. Allo is going to mean different, implying that organisms who allopatrically speciate are actually in different lands. Sym usually stands for same or in harmony. So these organisms who speciate are actually on the same land. They're in the same area when they speciate. Now I've got some definitions for those two that are a little bit more clear and written down. Allopatric speciation is going to result from geographic isolation, so separating a population into two geographic areas, like we saw with our poor gummy bears earlier. If they can't physically contact each other, they can't have babies. On the other hand, sympatric speciation is going to occur in the same geographic area, meaning these gummy bears still got physical access to each other. Which kind of leads us to our next question, which is how? How can they still separate into two different species that can no longer breed together or have babies together while they're still in the same physical area? So now what we're going to discuss are what I'm going to call mechanisms or types of reproductive isolation. One way that we could keep animals from reproducing with each other or to isolate them reproductively was through geography, right? If I throw up a mountain range between the two of them, they're probably not going to get together. They have been reproductively isolated. However, like we were saying earlier with sympatric speciation, we've got to think of some other ways that animals just can't get it on. I'm going to talk to you guys about 5 different ways that we can reproductively isolate organisms, even though they're in the same geographic area, causing them to actually speciate. The first way that I actually prevent animals from reproducing is something that is called temporal isolation. You can keep taking notes in your notebook. I'm going to take them on this page for speed. So you can see I have a nice sympatric populations here. They're in the same area. In the case of temporal isolation, temp refers to time, especially for organisms such as animals. They have very specific mating rituals. So say, for example, it's June. It's beautiful, warm summer months. In June, that's when my orange gummy bears just love to get it on. That's when they're going to be coupling up, mating, sharing their genes. Oops, let's give him a partner. Oh yeah. Okay. However, red gummy bears, they're just not feeling it in June. It's not their month. So since it's not their mating season, there's no way that they're going to breed with an orange gummy bear and pass on or mix their genes. Now, some time has passed. It's now August. All those orange gummy bears are busy having their babies, but it's now time for red gummy bears to get it on. So red gummy bears during their mating season in August, once again a lonely heart, won't make him happy, are going to have their babies at a very different time compared to orange gummy bears. This prevents them from exchanging genes with each other and allows them to start to evolve separately from each other. So temporal isolation is time-based, and it's usually going to be dependent on the mating seasons of your organisms. So the mating seasons are the second way that you could reproductively isolate your gummy bears would be through something called behavioral isolation. As the name implies, the behaviors of the two species are different, and so they don't want to get together and reproduce. Fancier way of saying it, their mating rituals or the ways that they attract their mates are very different. So for example, let's say orange gummy bears attract their mates through a little wiggle dance. Other orange gummy bears will be attracted to the wiggle dance and will love to pair up with them. And this could happen for all of your beautiful wiggling gummy bears. Okay. On the other hand, orange or red gummy bears are attracted to a nice little bouncing courtship dance. They love to bounce together, and once they found the beautiful high jumper that they love, they will pair together. Now, though they're sharing the same geographical space, if you put a wiggler with a bouncer, ew, they're gonna hate each other and they will never, ever get together, share their genes, and as a result, they're going to speciate or evolve apart from each other. The third type of isolation that I'm going to talk about is going to be mechanical or chemical isolation. So this is if your gummy bears, they're mating at the right season, it's June, everyone's happy, they're doing the right mating dances, they're really happy, they want to get together, but then they might run into some mechanical problems. The idea being, if the genitals don't line up, it doesn't fit, no fertilization is going to happen. You've noticed I also put chemical isolation as part of mechanical isolation because some species have developed some really interesting chemical barriers to keep sperm and egg from other species getting in together. This is especially prevalent in aquatic animals because the way that they reproduce is they just release their eggs or their sperm into the water surroundings, and they just let them intermingle with everybody else's eggs and sperm until they get fertilized. How they make sure that the right species egg and the right species sperm actually connect together and get fertilized is by making sure they have certain chemical properties that will allow the egg and sperm to come together. If that sperm touches an egg that it doesn't belong to, of a different species, there'll be a chemical property that would actually probably kill it off. If you're interested in seeing more of this, and it actually does look pretty cool, I would look up videos of things like sea urchin spawning. That's when they just release their eggs and sperm into the sea. It's beautiful and it's crazy at the same time. Now, our last two forms of sympatric species isolation have to do with hybrids, hybrid inviability and hybrid sterilization. I'm going to remind you that in order for a species to be considered a species, they both interbreed, so yes, reproduce with each other, but they've also got to produce fertile offspring. Remind yourself that a hybrid is the offspring of two genetically different organisms. So we can talk about maybe two gummy bears from different populations. Let's say that for whatever chance, these two gummy bears, they've got the right mating season, they've crossed the temporal barrier, they've crossed the geographic barrier, they're doing the correct dances and mating rituals, so they crossed the behavioral barrier. They even got the right mechanics to make it all happen, and they're gonna pop out a baby. Okay. Now there's two things that this baby has to do in order for them to be considered now part of the same species. First thing is baby's gotta live. If baby dies, these two are not considered part of the same species anymore. That's going to be called hybrid inviability. Viability refers to ability to live. If something is viable, it's able to live. the prefix in viability, is going to say that this hybrid does not have the ability to live. So if the offspring of two gummy bears or two organisms is not viable or dies, these two will not be considered part of the same species because of hybrid inviability. In hybrid sterilization, once again, two gummy bears can cross all reproductive barriers and get together, pop out some offspring or their hybrid, and this hybrid does live. He's viable. However, when this hybrid goes on to mate with, say, another hybrid, they realize they cannot have children. When an organism cannot have children, this is called sterilization, or being sterile. It can also be known as the inability to produce offspring. So, in order to really see if the original parents are of the same species or not, you really got to watch their hybrid children and see if the hybrid children can produce their own offspring. Interestingly enough, hybrids, or the offspring of organisms from two different species, are generally very sick animals and don't tend to survive well. Something about the mixing of the genes from the two different species doesn't give the perfect balance that's beneficial to life. There are some interesting hybrids out there, though, that are well known. For example, mules are the hybrid of a donkey and a horse. There are things such as ligers, which are the hybrid of a lion and a tiger. Those, however, are sterile. Both mules and ligers are sterile, meaning you can't put two ligers together and get another liger, and you can't put two mules together and get another mule. They're unable to have children. So mules and ligers, while interesting animals, are not actually considered part of a species because they're hybrids that are sterile. Same goes for that strawberry that I picked up earlier in the strawberry examples. Remember, the garden strawberries, the ones that we normally buy at the store and eat, are actually a cross between those tiny wild strawberries and the South American larger berries. We're eating hybrids. That's weird. The reason why we had those two different species of strawberry, the smaller northern hemisphere strawberry and the larger southern hemisphere strawberry, is because of geographic isolation, or the fact that those two plants were not able to interbreed or share their genes. Alright folks, so for the summary for today, we talked about the idea of speciation, or the fact that when two organisms are not able to reproduce together or reproduce fertile offspring together, they no longer can share genes. As a result, their gene pools start to diverge, showing that disruptive selection, and they will form two new species. There were many different barriers we could throw into these poor organisms' path to keep them from reproducing with each other. The simplest being a geographic barrier. Keep them physically separated, they can't have offspring. I could also keep them separated by talking about temporal isolation or time-based isolation, when one species wants to mate at a certain time of the year that another species does not want to mate at. I can talk about behavioral isolation, where the mating behavior, dance, ritual, song, whatever it is, of one species just does not attract the other species. As a result, they will never mate together. If for whatever reason the two organisms are able to pass all these barriers and actually try to mate, they could also run into barriers such as mechanical isolation, in which their genitals are just not lining up, or they have chemical barriers that actually kill off the eggs and the sperm. This would be almost like thinking about a Chihuahua trying to get together with a Great Dane. It's just a size thing that's not going to happen. That's all for today, folks. You should now be able to complete that entire practice for evolution review and speciation. Reminder that it is due on Friday at 11:59 p.m. If you're PAP, stick around because I want to teach you guys 2 more terms related to speciation. But other than that, I will see you on the interwebs. PAP students, what do you remember about zygotes? Now, if you thought in your head just now that a zygote is a fertilized egg, i.e. when haploid sperm and haploid egg come together to form diploid fertilized egg, you would be correct. In other words, a zygote is formed when an egg and a sperm come together and form a fertilized egg, also known as a zygote. Slim, we talked about zygotes way back at the beginning of this year when we were doing meiosis and gametes and stuff. Why are we talking about it now in evolution? Well, remember that speciation has to do with that egg and that sperm actually meeting, fertilizing the egg, transferring the genes between two organisms to make sure that they stay in the same gene pool and they don't separate and diverge. So all of these different barriers can be categorized as being either post-zygotic or pre-zygotic barriers. So let's get that last category in. Pre-zygotic barriers, as implied, are going to have to happen before fertilization. So things like geographic distance, because if they're separated physically from each other, they're never going to have a chance to get together and actually form a zygote. Post-zygotic barriers are going to happen after fertilization. So something where you've passed your geographic barrier, you've passed the temporal, behavioral, mechanical barrier, but we're now talking about hybrids. Because even if they're able to form that zygote, the zygote might not be viable or it might be sterile. So these two would be considered post-zygotic, whereas you can figure out by deduction the other four are going to be pre-zygotic. Just remember your prefixes, so pre meaning before, or before the zygote is formed, and post meaning after, or after the zygote is formed. From that, we can conclude that pre-zygotic barriers happen all along the way up until the moment that the sperm and the egg touch and they form the zygote. Post-zygotic barriers are going to be anything that happens afterwards when your egg has already been fertilized and you're already developing your embryo and your hybrid.